This is the 83rd Annual Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Symposium, Brains and Behavior, Order and Disorder in the Nervous System. I'm Rebecca Leshan, Director of the Banbury Center here at Cold Spring Harbor Lab, and I'm pleased today to be joined by Reed Montague, who's a professor at Virginia Tech and has a lot of other titles and awards that I'm not going to describe because it would take the entire 20 minutes. Thank you for being here with me today, Reed.
Thanks for having me.
So I wonder if you could start us off by just giving us a snapshot, a 2-minute or 4-minute elevator pitch of your research.
My research lives at the interface of what would now be called artificial intelligence and neurobiology. So right in the middle, right where life happens at the interface. And it focuses on something that you might call reward learning. How do we learn to value the world, revalue the world, and use those valuations to choose actions? My particular take on the problem, and this is a vast problem now, many of the talks in this symposia are focused on reward learning in animal models. But my take has been a computational one. My job, as it were, has been to ferry theories from artificial intelligence about how any adaptive system should behave, and sort of do divination over the neurobiology, interpreting various biological implementations with artificial intelligence like quantities, computing in the brain.
Which is really stunning because everything else seems to be in the opposite direction of how can we build better AI based on what we know about neuroscience.
Well, here's the interesting thing. So first of all, 25 years ago when I started working on this, you could not get this work arrested. The only way to get it arrested is to go out and jaywalk with your paper in your hand, and then you could start pointing to the abstract and conclusions. People didn't think we were doing biology. Okay, so this is work I did early on. I was a littermate, as it were, with Peter Diane, who's a professor at the Gatsby Computational Neuroscience Unit, and this past year won the Brain Prize, the European Brain Prize. And we went after the role of a set of systems in your brain that report on value and reinforcement and whatnot. And we, at the time, interpreted we sort of just thought these things should be implementing a certain kind of algorithm. Well, that doesn't feel like biology in a way. There's not a nerve cell and action potentials and synapses and neurotransmitter release and all the complications that biology throws at things. It is, by my estimation now, in its first order, a validated model. Okay, it's taken a long time to see what that means, and now people are breaking parts of it. They're using the model to say, well, it's not really right here, and it's not really right there, but it's provided, even where it's wrong, it's provided insights, I think. But it makes you step back a bit from the science. So when you go to study a biological system, what you typically do is you say, here's all these space and time scales. Here's the whole organism, here's the brain, here's a subsystem in the brain, here's how a certain cell type works, here's how gene expression and signaling amongst molecular signaling cascades works. And that's one way to decompose the nervous system. We have to do that because we want to understand how they work so that we might fix them, understand them, control them for our ends, etc. But that's not going to tell you what software they're running, not in a one-to-one way. It's a surprising looking structure in there. And so, in my opinion, one way to go in to do that is just to study the algorithms alone and start asking, what would the system need to do? Where would these algorithms live? And in many cases, like biological structures, take the eye for instance. It's thought by people who think about these things that the eye has evolved 30, 40, maybe 50 independent times. Creatures that use light and then subsequently vision to survive discover solutions. Biological solutions evolved over generations to the problem of using light to stay alive. And so there are lots of ways to implement the idea of an eye. Okay? I think it's the same thing in the learning domain. Learning algorithms are so profoundly important to understand how to take experience now, reorganize your internal structure, and produce better actions in the future, that they're implemented in ways that are probably surprising too. And so there's a nice tension between the two things, the sort of abstract and algorithmic and the biological, but you should expect that these algorithms have been stumbled into by biology in many different contexts. And so you see reinforcement learning systems, reward systems in bees and sea slugs and birds, learning songs in human beings and rodents, etc. And they have some common biological motifs, but it's my sense that the algorithmic side is now marrying up with the biology quite well.
And now, talking about all of those different species and models, your work is primarily directly in humans, is that right?
Now, my experimental work, my work for the first 15 years of my career was I made models of other people's data.
Okay.
Okay. It was an illegitimate profession. Now it's been legitimized by...
We might call it a hustle. No.
A little bit of a shuck and jive. I early on modeled electrophysiological data from primates and from rodents and from bees. Bees that where physiology was being done on biogenic amine systems in bees, where behavior was being done on the bees. And I married this is again with Peter Diane. Those were my fun years. I guess it's been downhill since then. We married the way these neural systems work with the kinds of behaviors that they would emit. So that stretched itself across neural implementation and the statistics of decision making. And part of that has grown into a subfield of what's now decision making, which is a gigantic enterprise, all the way from policy down to sea slugs.
Well, I was curious or interested in some of your work that was looking at social interactions and I think decision making as a part of that, and it struck me as how relevant today in terms of politics. Are you finding watching the news and sort of being inspired, or getting people asking you questions?
Political news is not inspiring to me.
Okay.
I won't assign a particular grade to it right now, but it's not surprising either. One of the things that we did, my lab, so once I left my early work was at the Salk Institute, and I moved to Texas to a place called Baylor College of Medicine, where I was for 17 and a half years. The work there, I turned to testing these ideas in functional MRI experiments in human beings, and then from there, it was an obvious question. One of the things, what do humans do, and what do humans do well that other animals aren't good models for? And the answer is they think about other people well.
Okay. Yeah.
So like you are sitting here wondering what I'm going to say next. Will I wave my hands too much and hit you in the face? I have a bad habit of that. And so you have a model of what I'm likely to do next, and I have a model of you. And if I don't have the second kind of model, so that's a first order model. You see me behave, what's he going to do next? Is he going right? Is he going left? The second order model is your model of my model of you.
Oh my
And if you don't have that, you can't do what everybody has to do, which is image management. You can't send signals to me to manage my impression of what you mean and who you are. A job interview. So you go to a job interview, and one of the things that you're doing is emitting signals in a behavioral space to a machine that can make deep inferences over this. And one of the things you're trying to estimate is, what do they think I'm like? And if the model is over here and you don't want it to be, then your job is to send signals over there that moves their model of you back over here, and you're picking up on scant signals in that domain. That's one capacity that doesn't work right in kids with certain kinds of developmental disabilities, like autism spectrum disorder. So there are things about social exchange that don't go quite right in those children. So I was interested in that. I mean, I was interested in moving into domains where I could see, if I made any progress, I could see a practical outcome. I really like that. I was at Baylor College of Medicine. There's a person there called Huda Zogby, who I think you're going to interview later, who has this inspiring body of work where the thing that she does is go right in after diseases that afflict families. And so every little step forward feels good. It feels good to the families, it feels good to the researchers, et cetera. So I like that. So we started designing two-party games, interactive games, where we had lifted the theory for these games out of the mathematical economics and game theory worlds, and we crafted them to our own end. Started scanning, doing functional MRI on two people interacting together, and then use these games to ask, are the same reward learning systems engaged by games between two very sophisticated actors, human beings, right? That work is now scaled up to, we're now able to record, because I had this extremely gifted postdoc in my lab the last 5 years, Ken Kashida. We're now able to record sub-second fluctuations in dopamine and serotonin during social exchange games in human beings.
Which had not been measured before.
No, actually serotonin measurements we're making, I think haven't been made in not at the scales we're making, haven't been made in any species. The reason we got permission to do it in a human being is people were being implanted with deep brain stimulating electrodes, and we got a window of 15 minutes per subject to do these experiments.
Wow.
And the subjects are, so it's inspiring work for one reason, which is the subjects know that our experiments aren't completely risk-free. They know it's not going to help them, but they know what it has been like to get to this stage where you're letting somebody put a microwire in your head and turn on an electrical current. And so we have an extremely high sign-up rate for that. And it has worked. I mean, it's been a bit of a climb. We've been doing it for 5 years. I guess we've done 87 people.
I think about the mouse equivalent, and it would have been.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work. This is a testimony to Ken Kashida and the other people in the lab that real Trojans about this. But and of course, the first thing that happens when you study, and it's people with Parkinson's disease and people with essential tremors. Essential tremors is not a dopamine disease. Parkinson's disease is.
Right.
You lose dopamine neurons, and the treatment for Parkinson's disease is to take drugs that replace the dopamine.
Right.
We immediately start learning different things. I mean, the minute you make a measurement that nobody's ever made before, in a behavioral context, it's never been put to somebody in that condition before, you start learning things. I won't go through the details of it, but one of the cool things that we have learned is that the reward learning systems in your brain, as mediated by dopamine, they communicate what's going on in terms of, are you learning the right sorts of things to make value here? But they also look at counterfactuals. So it combines information about what is happening now and what might have happened had you made different decisions. And there are theories out by computational scientists that say you can't make inferential engines, you can't make inference models in human beings that ever have a chance at being cognitive unless you can do this other thing, this counterfactual thing. Think in a counterfactual way and look at the physical substrates of that. So that's been an exciting part of those discoveries.
And has part of that crossed over into thinking about, I know some of your work has been tied to criminal justice and how you look at different types of defenses for... that's sort of a separate line. What's common between what I'm doing with the dopamine system and what I'm doing with the MacArthur Foundation Project on Neuroscience and Law is the machine learning part. So we use modern machine learning techniques to produce methods for measuring dopamine in the brain, and we use exactly analogous techniques to try to classify mental states of people. I was on the MacArthur Foundation project for, I guess, a decade. And I was part of the risky project, as they said. And not because it was about risk.
Yeah, I'm like the guy they take into the party and they put you in the corner on the couch. Here, sit beside our friends, our risky friends over here. The riskiness of the project was this. There's something called the Model Penal Code, circa 1960. And what it acknowledges and ensconces and bakes into law is the notion that when you commit a crime, all elements being equal, you can do it in one of 4 mental states: purposefully, knowingly, recklessly, or negligently. And you can be differentially punished depending on what if the court finds that you were in a state of knowing, you're going to get a very different punishment, all elements being the same, than if they say you were just merely reckless. So that interested me for several reasons. Some people have claimed that those sorts of mental state distinctions aren't real, that they're used to disenfranchise the disenfranchised even more. The statistics of incarceration would support that. So it's a hot button important issue for us to understand. So the question that we were trying to ask is, if you composed a scenario that mimicked knowing versus reckless, just a game, a scenario that the lawyers on the MacArthur Foundation panel sort of sanctioned, could you decode brain activity during that game that could say whether or not they were in a knowing or a reckless state? Now, what this won't do, and the answer is yes, quite easily, you can distinguish those two things. What that kind of information won't do, though, is not going to inform
when you're
approximate case. Like you come into the court, and I'm not going to put you in a brain scanner and read out some numbers and say, on August 3rd, 14 years ago, you were in a state of knowing versus reckless. What it will do, I think, is inform the way they think about the law sort of outside of the court. So I don't see it as having any impact right now on adjudication.
Sure.
But thinking about it.
But helping to look at reframing how we look at the law and how we look at.
Yes, absolutely. And we also discovered a few things that I won't belabor here. We discovered a few things in the experiment that the lawyers didn't expect.
That's great.
So.
So is there, outside of, I guess, criminal justice, is there a space that you would like to take your work into, either a disease state that you feel has been neglected or would really fit with some of these tools and technologies?
I'm definitely going after disease states because, for example, in Parkinson's disease, which is a dopamine disease, you have it's thought of as a motor disease. It's a neurodegenerative disease.
Right.
Dopamine neurons die. By the time you show up in front of a clinician with measurable symptoms, you've lost 70 to 80% of the neurons. The treatment is to take a precursor molecule that gets converted into dopamine, and then you're better for a while. And about 30 to 40% of those patients, those effects wear off. And then they become eligible for putting a microwire in your head, which is really an amazing symptom reliever, but it doesn't say anything about the basic mechanisms. Our experiments now are the first experiments that have ever been able to say anything about the kind of information either still encoded by dopamine or not encoded by dopamine. And so we're hoping to give a new look at that disease. That's one. The second thing is we've taken these new methods, very modern methods in terms of their machine learning dependencies, and we're moving them over to different substrates, wires that could be put into people's heads. So people, for various reasons, have wires put in their brains all the time. Monitoring for epilepsy, for example, if you're going to have, if you have an epileptic focus, they'll put lots of microwires in your brain, then put you in the hospital and monitor you for 4 days. And we think we can turn every one of those wires into fast neurochemical information that we've never had before from the human brain. Now that's the human brain. That same maneuver can then help also communities using model organisms as well. And so we're pushing on the technological front to make that happen. And my lab in particular is going after these various disease states that we can get a good angle on.
So one of the things I've noticed at this particular meeting this year has been a couple of buzzwords or buzz tools, and it seems to be bubbling up around everywhere else. And one of those is computational psychiatry, which I think you have been on board with before the trendiness came.
We made the first unit in Houston. We raised money from various foundations. We formed a unit in 2006, had a logo, made faculty hires.
Wow.
I'm associated with a unit in London that's sponsored by University College London and the Max Planck Institute. I guess I coined the term. I coined the term when I was talking to the former head of the National Institute of Mental Health, Tom Insel, and he said, I knew him for various other reasons, and he said, so what are you doing lately? And I said, well, I think I'm taking what I've been doing with reward learning into an area called computational psychiatry. And he looked at me and went, what is that? That's a ridiculous name. And he's right, it's a ridiculous name, but people remember ridiculous names.
Yes.
You remember Engelbert Humperdinck?
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't?
But are you finding that it's now becoming easier, or is it becoming flooded with a lot of people sort of coming into this space?
People are always, okay, so here's the forward-looking and here's the cynical. People are always looking for a new way to think about what they're doing. I'm encouraged because I think young people in general are very attracted to it because they like the idea of doing something with their science that impinges on things that make a difference. And they really are, this generation of sort of 20 to 35-year-olds are very inspired to do things that are socially worthwhile. And there's lots of interest because of that. Peter Dayan, who I mentioned at the beginning of this, and I have started a new journal, Computational Psychiatry, sponsored by MIT Press. We're begging for papers now. There are door prizes and toasters for those who submit papers. It's an open access journal.
Oh, great.
We run courses in London. We run courses in the US. It's a nonprofit foundation that supports that. I mean, to the degree it supports it. And so it's turning into something. And the other thing about computational psychiatry is there are many levels that you can come in. You can go into a patient population and do a kind of epidemiological approach and use models, or not even models, just data mine across patient populations and say, you know, do we see signals there that we didn't expect before, behavioral signals. Those can be used to structure queries into the nervous system of people using functional imaging experiments or other modalities. Or can be used to say, well, we think this neural subsystem is off, and then go and test ideas and model organisms. And so it's a great way to structure an approach. If you think about getting sick, if you get sick, if you feel like you have a fever, if you have a stomach ache, if you have all kinds of GI problems, muscle aches, you're tense and all that stuff, you go to the doctor, they do tests. They suck your blood out, and they look at your thyroxine levels, and they look at this and look at that. If you have a problem with the way you're perceiving the world, if you have a recurring problem of interacting with people in ways that you just don't understand, you go in front of a psychiatrist and they talk to you. Now, I'm not saying talking to you is a bad idea, but I'm saying we would like to have something very concrete.
To legitimize what you're experiencing, as there are other people like me.
Yeah, here's what's not culturally well either appreciated or accepted. There is no mental state your brain isn't supporting. It is a physical state. There is no gap between psychology and biology when you're talking about mental states that get in the way of you perceiving the world in a way that allows you to have a job or a relationship. Okay? We would like to understand that in a way that we could move you left or right of that, or understand how to use those computational models and think about using a biological intervention in order to move those models around. What we do now is you give people medications that are very well designed, and they know what receptors they're touching. You twiddle the receptor, and you look for a behavioral endpoint, which is basically self-report. Well, we can do better than that.
We can do better. I love that. I think we'll end there. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk, and I look forward, you will be giving the Dorcas Cummings lecture. Very distinguished, look forward to that, and thank you, Reed.
Thanks for having me.